If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so honored today to have on the line Ed Flattau, who is the nation's first and longest-running syndicated environmental newspaper columnist with over 40 years in the industry, columns in more than 120 daily newspapers, and has a reader base literally around the world with over 3,700 columns already written and 4 books, and the books are named, I have them right here below me, and we're going to talk about the 4th one. We're going to talk about Tracking the Charlatans, Peering Through the Bushes, Evolution of a Columnist, and now today, Green Morality, which is coming out this fall. Ed Flattau, thank you for joining us on Green is Good.
It's a pleasure.
And obviously, you are unbelievably prolific. You've been writing about the environment way before it was ever cool, way before Al Gore won a Nobel Peace Prize, an Emmy, and an Academy Award the same year. Tell us about the evolution of Ed Flattau before we even get into your latest work.
Well, the column was originally founded in 1970, right after Earth Day, and the originator of it was the late Stuart Udall, who was Interior Secretary under President Kennedy, and was a well-known environmentalist and writer. And Stu founded the column because he felt that American newspapers really had no perspective on environmental issues, weren't covering it, and there was this void, and with his name recognition, he was able to create this column. I don't know that anyone else could have done it unless they had the kind of name recognition he did. And so he started it out, and in 1972, he started to work with Senator McGovern on McGovern's presidential campaign, and found that he didn't have really the time to devote to the column, and he was looking for a successor, and he came across a number of my environmental writings, and we talked and hit it off, and we're on the same wavelength, and eventually I basically took over for him.
Wow, but when you got involved, it wasn't a cool, hip thing to write about, and now it is maybe, given where this world stands in the Gulf crisis, maybe one of the most important and coolest at the same time subjects that need to be discussed and written about. How has your life and professional life evolved with regards to all this? And then I want to get and talk about the evolution of green morality versus all your other books.
Right. Well, when we started out, it's true it wasn't as widespread. The environmental hadn't permeated the general public as much as it is today. However, it was following that first Earth Day, and it's true that prior to that first Earth Day, environment was kind of a low-level issue, but after that, it did attract a lot of attention, and of course the decade of the 70s is when Congress enacted the major environmental statutes that to this day are the bedrock of environmental legislation in this country.
So let's talk about, you have a new book coming out called Green Morality.
Right.
It's about mankind's role in the environmental responsibility and what's going on. Is there even a greater, is not today the greatest day on the planet to ever be talking about this, when we all can turn on CNN and watch what now? They've just admitted 50,000 barrels a day of oil coming out of into the Gulf. So the timing of your book couldn't be more perfect. Why don't you explain a little bit about why you wrote it and what people can expect to find in it?
Well, the book is basically a journalist's polemic examining human beings' ethical relationship with the world around them, and the basic theme of the book is that we have a moral obligation to the present as well as future generations to leave the world as good, if not in better shape than we found it. So it's obviously very applicable to what's going on now in the Gulf and with global warming. these are two issues where there is a problem with our politicians addressing the fate of future generations as well as the present ones. There's a lot of pandering to immediate gratification, and that's where I think they've fallen down a lot. And this book really goes after that a lot.
Talk about some of the problems and the solutions that you lay out as a premise in your book.
Well, what I would say for a solution, I would just read you actually a couple of sentences which describes the vision I have for what our economy should transition into. And so it goes like this. In an ecologically stressed world, we cannot entrust our future to an economy based primarily on people buying a lot of resource-intensive goods that they really don't need, often cannot afford, and if they reflected at any length, actually did not want. Our country must change the face of commerce by shifting away from reliance on the sale of consumer items built for abbreviated durability and one-time disposal. The U.S. economy must depend more heavily on the marketing of technological innovation. Expansion and maintenance of municipal and transportation infrastructures and alternative energy systems should be major sources of new jobs. And other avenues of employment that should assume a larger role are the agricultural sector and labor-intensive service entertainment industries, ranging from education and health to arts and recreational pursuits. And our factories should concentrate more on the manufacture, repair, recycling, and reuse of essential products, essentially big-ticket items. And as much as possible, all goods should be produced with recycled materials that, when exhausted or outmoded, could be recycled once again, perhaps for some lesser use. And raw materials utilized in manufacturing should, when feasible, be of the renewable kind and extracted at a rate that allows adequate time for regeneration. So that's the vision that I see, the positive vision that I see, and hope for that we will achieve it at some point.
Well, if I was a pastor, all I would say is, can I get an amen? I mean, that just sounds all practical, and why Mike and I do this show. I mean,
amen.
I mean, amen. Thank you, Mike. And so, I mean, Ed, let me just boil that down, because that was well done. I mean, honestly, and I want people to get your book, because this is important stuff. But Ed Flattau, after all these years, hopeful, hopeless?
We're moving in that direction, and I think that the positive things is that we have a survival instinct, we have resilience, and when these two click in, they produce a pragmatic streak. And we also, I think, a majority of the people on this planet have an innate sense of decency to combat poverty. So the tools are there. The question is, do we do it in time? Will these things go into action in time? Can we be proactive before a crisis, before the crisis, or do we react to the crisis after, when it may be too late? So, and I think a key to that is, are we going to have a leader or leaders that will be able to lead us in that and get us to do the things that we need to do in time? That's an open question. So I guess my answer is, we have the tools, and then it's just a question of, do we utilize them in time?
You know, Ed, in listening to you speak just now, and also when you quoted from your book, you put me in mind of another one of my favorite writers who spent a lot of time in reflection. He spent more than a year of his life living a very simple, deliberate life by a certain pond that has since become famous. And, you know, I think you and Henry David Thoreau are definitely two of a kind, and you put in today's terms, I think, what Henry David Thoreau said back in the 19th century so well. It's more about simplification of our life. When you said the consumer-driven society, often chasing things that are disposable, used once, have built-in obsolescence. I'm paraphrasing now.
Right.
Things that we cannot afford, and so often, when upon further reflection, find that we don't even want. I mean, that's a 21st century way of saying what Thoreau said back in the 1800s.
Right. Well, I think that there are Americans who are living this way of life right now. Not enough of them, but I'm sure you've had the term, heard the term, and probably used it on your program, voluntary simplicity. And that is the terminology for this movement, which is, I guess, in its embryonic stage in this country, but hopefully will take root. And voluntary simplicity encompasses most of these ways of doing things.
Well, you're amazingly prolific, tracking the charlatans, peering through the bushes, evolution of a columnist. Why another book? Why another book, and why now? Explain green morality and its roots, and why is environmentalism a moral issue? We've had people come on and talk about it being as an economic issue. We've had other great guests talk about being as a biblical issue. Why a moral issue, Ed?
Well, first, you asked why I wrote the book,
yeah.
And I guess a lot of it was out of frustration because I've seen us, as I've covered the environmental issues all these years, I see us making the same mistakes that we made 25, 30 years ago, and it was 25 or 30 years ago that we came up with the solutions to correct those mistakes. So that compounds the frustration. The same mistakes, and we have the solutions, and we don't have the political will to put them into effect. So
right.
That was one motivation, and another one was this partisan paralysis, which I've talked about with you. I mentioned to you briefly earlier in the conversation that our political leaders are tending to pander to immediate gratification. They have a responsibility not just to deal with our present problems, but they have a responsibility to pave the way for future generations, and they're just derelict in that regard. And the third motivation, I guess, is we don't have all the time in the world. We're running out of time. We still have time, but we need to get cracking and do the things that we have the ability and knowledge to do. So that was basically why I wrote this. And as to why environmentalism is a moral issue, well, environmentalism really deals with the quality of life that we enjoy on this planet, and we have an obligation to preserve this quality of life, not just for our fellow human beings, but for, again, future generations.
Yeah, and explain.
So there's the morality of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I agree with you, and as you well put, Ed, just having the solutions is not good enough if we're going to continue the wholesale degradation and liquidation of the environment before we implement those solutions. They're for naught anyway. So I totally agree with your perspective. Tell us, you've had the honor and the opportunity to study and read and write and meet so many neat people. What for you encompasses and makes up a sustainable lifestyle in modern day, in this modern day world that we live in this technological, social media world that we live in? Well,
there are about 11 principles that I address in this book, and they're woven throughout the narrative. And I'll just run them down fast, and you can stop me. But these are sort of short terminologies, and even slogans, but hopefully they'll have meaning.
Sure.
And basically they're quality over quantity, recycle instead of single use, conserve ahead of consume, health ahead of profit, and by that I'm not saying no profit, I'm just saying in terms of priorities. And of course there you can see that principle is being violated in the BP spill and mining safety and so on.
Sure.
The burden of proof on the prospective polluter rather than on the potential victim, and in that regard, when we have toxic chemicals introduced by manufacturers, they should have the burden of proof to show that it's reasonably safe, rather than have a potential victim prove that they're being damaged by the product.
Right.
Then a very important one is to harmonize with nature rather than trying to conquer it. And an example of that is wetlands. We should try to preserve the wetlands for the great benefits they grant us, rather than pave them over and develop them and lose out on what nature offers us.
Right.
And then the next few are centralized control over local autonomy when you have a environmental problem that crosses boundaries, national boundaries or international boundaries. Compromise has limitations. Compromise is a major tool of our democracy, but when the margin of error disappears, like with endangered species, it's all or nothing. You either save it or you lose it.
Right.
And individual versus collective rights, there is no such thing as absolute private property rights. You have to have a balance between individual and collective rights. Otherwise, it's you're giving a choice of either anarchy or totalitarianism. You want something in between.
Right.
And I won't go for. There's just one more that I would mention. That's the precautionary principle, which is really the foundation of the national environmental movement, which is a simplified definition is better safe than sorry. So that if you have a major threat that's looming, you don't have all of the evidence to conclusively show that it's going to happen, but there's a great risk that it will. You don't wait for definitive proof. You look for cost-effective solutions and you put them into effect, rather than gamble that it won't happen.
Got it.
And global warming, of course, is a major example of that.
And these are all in your new book, Green Morality.
Yes, they're all woven throughout the narrative.
So all of these are great solutions and great ways to be, and great inspirational messages. Can we do this in time? Can we really adopt these principles in time to stop more Gulf crises from happening, to stop more Exxon Valdez's from happening?
Well, I'm hopeful we can, and as I mentioned before, a key will be leadership at the top. The grassroots movements can do a lot, but they can only go so far. They don't have the resources or the overview to put reforms into effect. It will take a leader who's bold and may be willing to risk re-election to get things going and take unpopular stands. I'm still hopeful that President Obama will be that individual. He's in a very tough position and has a lot of problems other than the environment, but needs somebody at the top to kick the reforms into progress.
Well, Ed, we're down to the last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and you make a great point of political will. Let's pretend for a minute that Ed Flattau is the new president of the United States, based upon the massive success of green morality. Give our audience members, our listeners, and give Mike and I a sense of the one or two great initiatives. What would be your health care as the new president of the United States to turn this whole ship around, this whole environmental ship?
Well, I rather in generic terms, I guess the way policy is changed, the way cultural reform is instigated in our society is through fiscal policy. So I would be using tax incentives and disincentives to steer people towards sustainable behavior, and which is, of course, what Congress is considering a lot. And an example being, giving subsidies to renewable energy, perhaps eliminating some of the subsidies for polluting industries, providing tax incentives for people to, put solar panels on their roofs. So using tax monetary policy to steer the society towards a more clean, environmentally sustainable way of life. That would be one way. And the other major avenue would be education. Hopefully being able to instill throughout our educational system sustainability courses which would indoctrinate kids into shifting values away from hyper-materialistic way of life and into a more sustainable and
better future,
conservation-oriented way of doing things.
And education is what Mike Brady and I try to do here at Green is Good, and you laid it out for our listeners today. And for those who want to learn more, we want you to go and get Green Morality when it comes out this September. And to learn more about Ed and his great writings, you could go to his website, edflattau.com. Ed Flattau, you are truly living proof that green is good.